We cannot stop having strep. But so strep, where we've found manifests itself in all of the ways. Like it's not just a itchy throat. It's like a full body rash, and it's ear hurting, and it's headaches, and it's throwing up. And so two of the six of us had been throwing up for 48 hours. So none of them were here on Sunday morning because of that. And then headaches, tummy aches, rashes, all the things. So, not like camps. They were just doing their normal, like being at their preschool summer camp, summer thing. But it's basically preschool that they just hang out with. So, not anything that is like extra that we paid for, like farm camp or something, thankfully. So, it's none of that as far as we know. So, but we're making it. Yeah. She is all on the amoxicillin right now, so she's not contagious. She'll say she's got a headache, but she's not contagious, though, so.
Maybe we'll wait a few.
Yeah. Yeah, hold on now. We have one of her, our next door neighbors was like, hey, we're going to the lake. And I was like, you are so sweet. 2 out of the 6 of us are throwing up, and we're like, and she's like, oh, maybe we can go to the lake next week. Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Well, hopefully they can do the pool day on Friday.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. Got the extra stuff.
There's no telling.
Who knows? All of the things. All right. All right, if you are with us this morning online, good to see you. If you're here with us, it's good to see you guys too. Going to be in the book of Judges chapter 7 today. What's up, Days? I believe that. So you said I'm just gonna leave him in there. What's up, Ash?
Best of luck to you. I just shut the door. Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
We locked the door. It's fine.
Maeve, you're fine. You watch after Margot, who's 3. Don't worry about it. Yeah, she's 5. She can totally do that.
She did tell Avery. She's like, I'm older than you now.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like, what a greeting.
I'm 5.
Well, translated, that's I'm in charge now. Like, don't tell me what to do because I'm in charge right now. 7. We read all of chapter 6, which was very surprising last week. I was able to make it all the way through, and now we're going to complete chapter 7. Hey, Linda, good to see ya. Okay, so I'm going to start off right where it makes sense. I'm going to ask you guys to reveal your deepest, darkest secrets. Particularly, what's the weirdest dream that you have ever awoken from and remembered and been like, none of that makes any rational sense at all. I would love to hear it. Go for it. That's what I want to hear. Reoccurring dreams? Man.
Yes, I have this one like really often, like a couple times a year, let's call it, for years. That I find like a secret door in the house that leads to like this shopping mall, and Mark and I are like, oh my goodness, we had no idea that our house like led to this fabulous mall. And it's like I don't know what the point is. It's just like we find it over in our house all the time.
I like it's surprising every time.
Look at the store we found.
Wow. I can't believe it. And even though you had the same dream 3 months ago, like that's such an odd dream to
Sort of little like mini adventure in the mall,
and then you wake up. Wow. Go for it.
I've had it for years. I mean, before there were jet packs and that sort of thing, that I could fly, without.
You could just fly.
And yeah.
Would you do anything? Or was it just let's take off?
Oh, this is so cool. Oh, look down there.
Yeah. And then you would wake up. That's so sad. See, I'm down for a recurring dream like that. That just sounds like
It was fun.
fun. Joy filled. All right, what else we got?
I always, because I don't like to go underwater,
Hmm.
I dream that I can swim underwater and just swim and
Oh,
lay down deep.
Linda, it's so wonderful going underwater. It's a big world down there, I hear.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. It's free, like you in the flying.
Yeah, it's freeing.
Yeah, it was just, it's wonderful. You're weightless and you're looking at pretty things and you're not worried about, you don't need to breathe. You don't need
Yeah,
no oxygen.
that's the best part.
Yeah,
Hey, you just go.
but I don't even put my face in the water. That's how it's.
Man,
I don't either.
do you avoid in the shower? Do you avoid like, nope, don't touch my face and stuff? Man,
I don't take a shower.
Man. I gotcha. That's okay. To each his own. So I know that none of those things are possible, but they are kind of still kind of rooted in like our experience of like, oh, it'd be cool to find a secret passage, or it'd be cool to go flying or go on a submarine or something like that. Anybody else have like dragons or like, like weird?
I have this weird, and every year or so, it's really weird. My brother and I are outside, and in the ground are like, these old-fashioned meat grinder things, and we have to avoid that. And then he
Oh my.
gets into it, and it's grinding on, and then, yeah, this is awful. And I'm running, and I'm hollering, help, 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 my brother. Well, then these big round things are coming after me, rolling after me, trying to push me. I mean, finally I wake up and I boom.
Did you have like a farming accident or something way back? That's like, I'm like envisioning like this big plow or combine like coming to like come and take you out, man.
It's like those old-fashioned meat grinders. Oh, it's so big. And then I'm
That's what I'm looking for. Like, man,
awful. I mean, it's terrible. And then, like I said, these things, the closer they get to me, the bigger, and they were going to devour me, and then I wake up.
that's terrifying. For those of y'all online that couldn't hear, they're playing. Is this whenever you guys are young? Like, are you guys like young, like kids?
Buildings and climbed.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, we did all those things together.
yeah.
So it's sad because it's my older brother,
And there's a grinder that he stepped into. A meat grinder that he stepped into, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, it's terrifying."
And he's telling me to run, and I'm trying to pull him out, and then this big.
Oh, that's so graphic too. Oh my goodness.
I can see it.
Yeah, yeah. My mom used to have a dream. Can't remember if it was a reoccurring dream, but that she was in a car, and there was a motorcycle that was going next to her, and then the motorcycle got in an accident. It wasn't my dream. I don't remember, but they got dismembered, like halved. Like I was like, Mom. Like I remember as a kid being like, that's disturbing. Like, and she would have this dream. What does that mean? Like, what's the omen about? Like, what is?
And what does fun mean?
Yeah, right. Don't get
I mean,
close
I have
to.
some really good dreams too, but that
Sure.
of every year or so, just have it and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And I haven't had it for a while. So.
Interesting.
No, I better not. You probably will. I'll fight that.
Tonight. Next Tuesday, let us know how that dream went again as you re-enter it. Cool. So I bet you all of us have had at least one interesting dream that you haven't been able to really like ground in any of our realities and stuff. And in this story, it's a very small part, but I think that it's interesting. It's a very small part of this story is this this dream that Gideon does not have, but it's a dream that somebody else has about Gideon, which is very interesting. So all of chapter 6, we got to meet this guy named Gideon. Can somebody give me a 15-second version if you were here last week or if you got a chance to read chapter 6? What do we know about Gideon? What happened to Gideon? What were some of the things that he did? Ready, set, go. Kind of a weak guy, the least in his family and the least clan. Do what?
Stays in the background.
Stays in the background.
Dad didn't even like it.
Yeah, man. He was least in his family. And his dad probably wasn't a favorite child. I don't think he was the oldest child either.
He tore down his dad's altar.
His dad worshiping Baal and set up an Asherah pole. He tore those things down in the dead of night. Why in the dead of night?
So that was however his dad find out he did it.
Yeah, I like what Ashley said. Coward. He's a coward. He's not going to do it in the daytime. He's going to do it at a time when maybe it wasn't Gideon. Maybe it's somebody else. But he did it with his servants.
Tom wanted to stone him, kill him.
Yeah,
Dad did say no.
there you go. Dad came through.
His dad finally.
Dad came through at the end because the townspeople, because of that, they wanted to stone him. But instead, he was like, hey, let Baal contend with him. Like, let Baal, if Baal is God, let him take care of him and not us. And they're like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Yeah, and they changed his name to Jerub-Baal, which basically means somebody that contests with Baal. So wouldn't that be cool if your name was changed to somebody that contests with Satan? And that every single time that you were like, oh yeah, my name is this, they'd be like, oh, like you are a warrior against like these evil forces. Like that's pretty cool. At the very beginning, whenever the angel calls him out before that stuff, he says, hey, mighty warrior. What's he doing? You guys remember? Yeah. Yeah. Talking to God and didn't know it. And he's like, me? What? Yes. He was threshing wheat in a wine press, which those two things shouldn't go together. Yeah, so he's hiding away from the Midianites and the Amorites, or whatever they were called. I can't remember. He was hiding from them and stuff too, and he says, hey, what's up, mighty warrior? And he says, me? There's no way. If I'm a mighty warrior, why hasn't God done something? And God's like, I am doing something. I'm sending you. And does Gideon say, woohoo, yes, I'm excited to go? What does he do, Trace? You remember? He says, just to be sure that it's you, let me bring you an offering. And then he's like, okay, makes the offering, erupt into flames or engulfs it. And then he's like, oh, I was talking with God the whole time. And then all that stuff happens with the Baal and the Asherah pole and, getting blame and stuff. And the very last part of chapter 6 is the Spirit comes down on Gideon and he amasses an army, right? He gets these army. It's kind of important. Let's see, chapter 6. There it is in verse 35, chapter 6, verse 35. It says that as he's amassing an army, he sent messengers all throughout Manasseh, which is his tribe, calling them to arms, and also to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. And he amasses a huge army, which we don't know how big just yet. And he seems like he's ready to go to battle, but he's not really ready to go to battle because what happens in verse 36 all the way to at the end of chapter 6? Right. He says, hey, God, if you really promise that I would have the Midianites, that I could take care of them, then do these 2 tests. Which is like, buddy, just like have some faith, like trust God. But he does this whole fleece thing twice, and God, instead of like zapping him for his lack of faith, is like, yeah, sure. I'll meet you where you're at. I understand that you're afraid. I've promised that I'll do this, but like, you've got this, buddy. You can do it, right? And this is the guy. He's got 3 chapters in Judges, which is pretty substantial. He's right up there next to Samson, who we know a lot about. Gideon, he's got a lot of verses that are about him. And I think arguably his biggest and greatest God moments happen in chapter 7 as well. So that's where we're gonna start ourselves today. So thank you guys for walking through that with me so that we understand who Gideon is and who he's becoming. Let's read these first 3 verses of chapter 7. Actually, Daisy, you have your Bible open? Would you read those first couple of verses? Verse 3.
Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained.
Okay. Really quick, let's see how big this army is. That very last sentence that Daisy read, how big is the army that Gideon? 22,000 plus 32,000. Yes. Yeah, she's got the math. She's going. So 32,000. Is that a big army? It sounds pretty big to me. I think so. I think that's half of the Razorback Stadium. I can't recall. Or maybe it's, I don't know. I think maybe I'm lying to you guys. That's a lot of people. Okay, 32,000 is a lot of people. And he's amassed them from not just his clan tribe, but from other tribes as well. So he kind of gets them all together and amasses them all right here. This whole battle that's about to take place. I know it's kind of far away, so I apologize. It's all happening right here, okay? Sea of Galilee, this is where Jesus does his whole ministry, all of that stuff, sticks around, all of that stuff. Jerusalem is all right here. There's a lot of stuff, and they're kind of right up here on the side, okay? So that's where all of this big battle is going to go down, okay? But you guys know that Marshall and I like to focus on sometimes what can seem like meaningless details, but I think it's things that really help us see the man that Gideon is and that Gideon is becoming. Let's read this verse again. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, and all of his men camped at the spring of Herod. Okay, what time of day is it? Early in the morning. Gideon has amassed this army of 32,000. What kind of a leader does it take to amass an army like that? I would imagine he's got a little bit of say, or there's some people going like, oh man, like he was able to tear down the Baal and the Asherah pole of his own father. Like, and something about him is compelling. The Spirit of God comes down to him and he's able to amass this big army. And so early in the morning, he got up along with all of his men and they camped at the spring of Herod. I think that the phrase early in the morning is a little bit important. If you're really, really fearful of going into battle, what might be an inclination of when you get up in the day? That's a terrible way to ask that. Oh, yeah. Okay, so if you're going to go to battle, it doesn't like we're going to go in at night, which actually tends to be this is what Gideon's going to do, okay? But why do you think it's important that it says early in the morning?
They probably didn't sleep well, so they were awake.
Awake already? Yeah. I know that more than a couple of my teenagers graduated and went into basic training. And it's not anything that I feel like I could do or ever do because of how intense and structured that it is. I'm more of a kind of a lackadaisical, just kind of, go about my day, and my kids kind of define the way that things go. I imagine that they wake up at like 4:30. I think they probably wake up even earlier on some days just to go run because that's insane. But whenever you're disciplined, you're waking up early and ready to go, or whenever you're a little bit afraid, which it turns out there's lots of people afraid. Hey, Connie. And so they wake up early in the morning, and I think that it's either the fear that they didn't sleep anyway. So they didn't sleep anyway. They've been up all night anyway, kind of a little bit terrified of what they're about to do. They enlisted. They're ready to go and fight this battle, but it doesn't mean that they're not afraid. Or it could mean that Gideon is awake. Gideon is alive. Gideon is this leader. And he says, guys, we're getting ready for this battle. I think it shows just a little, this is just me, I think it shows a little bit of his leadership in that he's not like staying in bed as long as he can because he's afraid of the battle that's about to happen, but he's getting up, he's getting his men ready to go, and they're camped at the spring of Herod. And we don't exactly know where, we know it's in this area, but we know that, and what we're going to find out here is that where Gideon and his army are encamped has a strategic advantage. We're going to look at that here in just a second. It says that the camp of Midian was just a little bit north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And so the author is like, yeah, you know where that is. But we have a good idea of where it is. So they're in the valley, and we're going to find out that Gideon and his army are actually encamped up on kind of like a mesa or a hill up above it. So they have a little bit of a military advantage here. Remember, how many people are we talking about in this army? Yep. Now that should elicit what kind of a response in a leader of like, it's a big army. We can do it. And how did Gideon amass this army? The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he gathered this, and he's like, yeah, okay, God said that we're going to take care of the Midianites. I've amassed this army to take care of the Midianites, so let's get down to business, make things happen. Linda?
Are they actually soldiers, or are they just people that they volunteered?
I think most of them would be people that volunteered, and I think that it probably wasn't like a I said it as a reference, but I said, let's get down to business. It's Mulan, the movie Mulan. Have you guys seen it? Have you seen the Disney movie Mulan? Maybe. Yes, the parents in the room. Okay, good. In the movie Mulan, they get it's like one male from each family. And whenever it's time for China to go and defend China, they get one male from each family. And that's where the rubber meets the road. The scary part of that, Mulan's father, who is this crippled old man, has to go and serve his country. But they went out into each of those villages and they said, we want one person from each family to come and serve. I don't know if it was like that as much as we're tired of this, right? We're tired of the Midianites and the Amalekites or whoever they were. Amalekites, there it is. I'm tired of them. And if you want to come and fight, we've got a leader that's going to come and take us to victory. Follow him if we want to be free. That's what I think. I don't think many of them were trained, but I do know that, I mean, whenever God is amassing these armies in Joshua and Judges, that there's these guys that are ready to fight, and they've got weapons, even if it's just like shears and shovels and stuff. They've got ways to fight. So 32,000, that's a pretty good force. But what does God think about that force? Verse 2. Too many. Is it possible to have too many men in battle? I guess it is. But for this battle, I would think you would want as many as possible. But he says, you've got too many men. I'm not going to deliver Midian into their hands. Or because why?
Because he wants it to be his glory.
What got Israel into this mess in the first place? Yeah. It's the cycle in Judges that we see all the time. They're following God, they're doing the good things, and then, as Scripture says, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. They hoard themselves out, literally or spiritually, out to other gods and to other people groups. And then God allows them to get overtaken and stuff. And so at the peak of a lot of that is pride of like, yeah, we can make our own rules and stuff. And so according to God, what could happen if Israel wins this battle with 32,000 people? Yeah, they said, yeah, we beat them. We're strong. And God's like, yeah, I see that happening. So remember, God isn't just trying to save them from physical bondage. What's he also trying to save them from, too? Yeah, he's trying to save them from themselves. If they won this battle, they could get a really big head and be like, man, look at us. We can drive out even the Midianites, who basically have infinity soldiers. And as we're going to find out, their camels number more than the sands of the sea. Whoa. And we can do that? Man, what can't we do? And they're just trading one oppression for the next because they have become so prideful. So God's like, we're not going to mess with that. I'm going to root that out, and this victory is going to be mine so that you can know that it's me that's saving you and not yourselves. And so he roots them out. He says, you have too many men. I'm not going to deliver Midian, or else Israel is going to boast against me. It's my own strength that saved me. So now I want you to announce to your army, anybody who's afraid, anybody who trembles with fear can turn back and leave. And how many people leave? Close. 22, because 10,000. Yeah, see, you've got the math is there. 22,000 people left. Imagine sitting in your ranks, and he's like, hey, if you're afraid, just go ahead and leave. And then more than 70% of the army gets up and leaves. It'd be like if me and Daisy and Ashley are standing here, and then me and Ashley just left, and Daisy's the only one, like, yeah, we can win this, right? There's 10,000 people left. 10,000 is still a pretty big force, but not near as much as 32,000. Something that I found was interesting is that, that would have been a little disorienting to me if I was a leader of like, 22,000 of my men were peeing themselves. And then when I said, hey, if you're afraid, like, leave. And then like more than 70% of the army was like, yeah, we're afraid. Like I was really excited to come and take care of them. But now that I'm actually here and I see them, I'm actually afraid. I'm going to leave. What's interesting about that, I didn't even realize that until this morning as I was just kind of looking over some stuff. God actually has provided an out in the Old Testament for if you were really afraid that you could leave, which I think it's kind of crazy. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5-8. You don't have to go there if you want to. You just want to write it down. But basically, in there is a couple of exemptions. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5-8. A couple of exemptions of like, hey, if you just bought land, you don't have to fight, because if you die, another man is going to take your land. And like, that's not great. I don't want to do that. Or hey, if you just got married, I'd hate for you to die out in battle right after that, and to have a widow here. So you don't have to go. And then at the very end in verse 8, he says, hey, if you're afraid, feel free to leave. Why? Because your fear can demoralize everybody else. I think, maybe. Does anybody like watching war movies like Saving Private Ryan or Hacksaw Ridge or anything? This is the struggle of having, like, where's Marshall, in a lot of those movies, I feel like it's a motif, but that you see that whenever one person starts having a freak out moment in their ranks, you just kind of watch. It's like dominoes. You watch the whole rank kind of lose it a little bit. And so God's like, hey, if you're fearful, you can just go. There's nothing wrong with them. You just go ahead and leave. And so that leaves 10,000 people that at least have a little bit of bravery, at least have a little bit of courage. So but God's not done yet, because in verse 4, let's just keep going. The Lord said to Gideon, hey, you've got 10,000. There's still too many. What number are you going for, God? Because 10,000, like, remember this. Yeah, right? This army, their camels are more numerous than the sands of the sea, which we're going to read here in a second. And 10,000 is too many? What number are we going for, God? And then he says, I want you to take them down to the water, and then I'm going to thin them out for you there. Basically, if I say this one will go with you, then he'll go. But if I say this one shall not, he shall not go. So there's not a ton of really good instructions, but like, hey, let's go give him a drink. And then once we're down there, I'll give you some instructions and I'll tell you like what's going to happen here. And so I want you guys to tell me what's happening in verse 5. Gideon took the men, these 10,000 guys, down to the water. And there the Lord told him, I want you to separate those who lap water with their tongues like a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs, and all the rest got on their knees to drink. Verse 7, then the Lord said, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. And so Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets to the others. What was happening there in verses 5 and 6? Oh, he's eliminating. He's getting him down from 10,000 to 300. And what's the prerequisites? Yeah. Most, at least the people that I read, there's not a right or wrong way to drink water. I don't know if there's a difference between kneeling down and like putting your actual face, this is your nightmare, Linda, putting your actual face like down into the water and drinking, or if it's bringing it up and drinking like this, or if it's bringing it up and then using your tongue like a dog to lap it up. So like, who are the two groups? It says, separate those who lap water with their tongues like a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. But then 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. So what are the groups here? Is what I'm asking. Right? Right. But the lapping, it's not like lapping down like this, but it's like you're putting your cupped hands up like this. The Hebrew is like really, really weird here. And so I think you're right, but it's kind of like, okay, who's lapping and kneeling and cupping? Right. But instead it's like kneeling, but it's whenever you do, but then not even like this, but then you like use your tongue. Like, I don't know. It is. And so there's even some guys that I was reading that they said that there may have been like a, I don't know who's telling this story, if it's Gideon or, Samuel that's recording all of this. But as Samuel's like, hey, so here's what happened. And the scribe was like, I think that was like this. And so it doesn't really matter. Not really. I don't think that there's a right or wrong way. And I don't think God really had a, well, these guys are, because they did this, they're more strong or something. Or maybe it was really like the people that were the most brave or something. It doesn't really matter. All God is doing... yeah, which maybe that's it. That's what they were saying too. It's like maybe it's just the group that had the less. God's like, well, let's use that group.
Well, and two, if you have, I was just thinking about this. If some of them may have had some type of something to get water,
Yeah.
a cup of some sort, and so they would get down probably and get it in the cup and then drink the water.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the others who don't have,
Not as prepared.
or whatever,
Yeah.
have to use their hands and have to lap.
That's a pretty good thought. hadn't thought about that, of maybe we're just getting the most prepared people. Not afraid, and also a little bit more ready for battle because they have more provisions. Is that what you're going for? Oh, because they don't have more provisions. So they're not as afraid. Right. Water. So how all this happened... And that's what he's like, I'm just going to tell you, man, this guy's in, this guy's out, this guy's in. And really none of that matters, because all that God is doing here is let's thin it all the way out so that the only person that can get glory from this battle is God. Okay, so that's what he does. And he lets all these guys go down. And let's just read verse 8 one more time to kind of get us where we need to be. Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of the others. At the very end of verse 8, it says, Now the camp of Midian lay below them in the valley. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. So they have a strategic advantage because they're up on the hill. The Midianites are down in the valley, okay? Hey, they had the things with them. So they distributed all that to these 300 guys. Remember, you've got 32,000 guys, and then all of those provisions are distributed amongst the 300. Nice. There's a movie that's called 300, which how many of you guys have seen? Okay, we've got a couple of us in here. This is a different 300, obviously. But if you're Gideon and you're leading this force, you had 32,000. Now you've got 300. What emotions might you be feeling despite the fact that God said, I'm going to win, and I'm going to win through you, and I'm the one that gets the glory? What feelings might you still have if you're Gideon? A little bit nervous. Yeah, man. Is Gideon peeing his pants? I don't know. I think he is a little bit nervous, though. And I hate it, but I feel like I would be too. Even after God has told Gideon, whenever he called him, he said, you are going to be the one that's going to decimate the entirety of the Midianites. And Gideon's like, yeah, I don't know. Let me make sure. And then even after he amasses this army, he's like, hey, just remind me that your promise is true. Okay. And he says, don't be angry with me, but remind me that your promise is true. Even after all of that happens, I think that Gideon, well, actually, we know that Gideon is afraid, because let's read verse 9. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, I want you to get up and go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. So he's reminding him one more time. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they're saying, and afterwards you're going to be encouraged to attack the camp. And what does Gideon do? Well, he went. He went, which means that Gideon had what emotion? He's afraid. He's afraid. Now, when Gideon has been afraid or unsure in the past, what has he done? He's asked for a sign. He doesn't do that this time, and I wonder if maybe God cut him off, because God's like, hey, listen, buddy, here's the deal. I want you to go down to the camp yourself and see what's going on down there. If you are afraid, I want you to go down to the camp and bring your servant Purah. Mine says servant. Do any of you guys, Stacy, did you say anything else? Servant? Okay. The Hebrew word there is either servant or young man or shield bearer. It doesn't really matter, because Purah in the story has no words. But what does Purah do for Gideon? Yeah, he was another presence. So here's what Gideon might be feeling. We know he's feeling fear for what's going to happen, but sometimes that fear could be really, really lonely, right? He's the guy that's in charge of these 300 guys, and he's the one that's supposed to go and deliver deliver Israel from the hands of the Midianites. So he's got that fear, but he's probably a little lonely too, of like, man, this is all on my shoulders. And so God meets both of those needs by saying, hey, buddy, if you're afraid, I'm going to meet that. We're going to go and address our fears straight on, and you're going to see how you don't need to be afraid. And second, I'm going to send a friend with you too. And the friend doesn't say anything besides just being with him. And I think that's pretty significant. So go confront your fears and do it with a friend. I think that's cool, and that's something that we need to take from this story too, is that whenever we're afraid of something, whenever we have fears in front of us and we're not exactly sure what's going to happen, God at times is like, okay, I see your fear. First, give that fear to me and let's go confront it together. But you don't have to do it alone. You can do it with other people. And God will provide friends. God will provide companions that can shoulder the weight of all of that too. We don't have this paragraph of encouragement from Purah of like, Gideon, God's told you a couple of times. He's done all this miraculous thing. Like, you can do it. He's just there. And sometimes that's just what we need for our friends too, which I think is nice. So let me make sure that we're right here on the right spot. Okay, so verse 12. He told him to go down there and to go and see all this so that he can be encouraged. I don't know what can be encouraging about going and looking at this army that looks enormous, and you've only got 300 guys, but God said that he's going to be encouraged by it. For verse 12, the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the other eastern peoples had settled in that valley, thick as what? Locusts. Woo! Their camels could no more be counted than the sands of the seashore. Where's the encouragement? Because I'm not feeling it just yet. Verse 13, Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. Here's where the dreams come in. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley came tumbling into our camp. It struck a tent with such a force that the tent overturned and it collapsed. And his friend responded, well, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite, because God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. Oh! So Gideon goes down, and he hears a man that has just woken up, and he's telling his buddy his dream, and instead of his buddy being like, oh, buddy, that was weird, he says, well, this can be none other than Gideon, the one that his sword is coming, and we're going to perish because of him, okay? I think this would be the equivalent to, like, I'm going on trek at the end of July with Sam, our youth minister, and a bunch of our teenagers, and me just waking up in the middle of the night being like, guys, crazy. I had this dream. I'm sitting in my office, and this fresh bread loaf smashed through the doors of the church and destroyed it. If I said that to the teenagers, they'd be like, did you eat like a weird mushroom or something out here? Like, maybe you are, like, just eat some bread, buddy. Like, I know we just have some provisions out here, but like, you can eat a little bit, okay? Something about this dream, this kind of omen. Remember, dreams at that point were, at this point in time, were meant to mean something. Most of the time, if you had a dream like that, it was like, oh, this is an omen. Somebody's trying to tell me something. And apparently this guy knows exactly what's going to happen. He says, well, that can be nothing else other than the sword of Gideon, who's going to come and defeat all of us. And so something about Gideon, remember, Gideon hasn't fought any battles up until this point. He's just torn down his father's altars. But something about him and about the army that he's amassing, or what God is doing, is making a big deal to the Midianites because they're afraid and there's some uneasiness on this night before the battle. And so would this be encouraging to Gideon? It should be. And in fact, it was. This, I think that verse 15, this is my opinion. I think that verse 15 is is Gideon's biggest moment. Verse 15 is Gideon's biggest moment. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and he worshiped. The word worshiped there, has like a connotation of him like laying down on his face, prostrate, of like laying down. Okay. Think about all the stuff that this kid has been through, of the fear and the anger and the doubt and like, God, when are you going to come through? Like all of these things. And it all comes together whenever God says, hey, it's finally here. The moment that I told you about at the very, very beginning when I called you that you're going to destroy the Midianites, like that moment is here. The way that I've promised you, and I've showed you 3 different signs, 3 different times that I'm going to do this, it's happening. And it's not God telling him that, but it's his enemies saying he's going to destroy us. Gideon is going to destroy us. And I think all at once, like everything that Gideon was before and everything that he's been through, it just kind of like clicks. And he's like, oh man, yes, God really is going to do it. God really is going to make it happen. Because look what he says right after that. It says that he returned to the camp of Israel and he called out in a loud voice, get up, the Lord has given Midianite into your hands. And so he says, not into my hands, not into Gideon's hands, but he places the victory where the victory is supposed to be. Has the battle happened yet? Battle hasn't happened yet. But he knows what's going to happen. And so he gets to empower these guys and say, hey, listen, I know the outcome of this battle. And so whenever we're fighting, which they don't really even have to fight, whenever we're fighting, know that you're fighting from victory and not for victory. And that's an important distinction. They're fighting from victory and not for victory. So how encouraged would you be if you had 100% certainty that you were going to win the battle that you were coming up against? I'd be like, oh, well, let's go. I don't even have to sharpen my sword. I'll just go out and cover my eyes and go, whatever that is, because I know that I'm going to win no matter what. That's a battle I'm ready to go down into. And so what you think is going to happen is not going to happen, because they don't go into battle in the traditional sense. In verse 16, I'll read all this kind of together. In verse 16, he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. So how many in each company? Here's the math. 100, here we go. Not a ton. I remember, whenever we're, to get a better sense of how many people that is, I mean, that's a 300, that's a couple more people than we have on a pretty good Sunday here at Flagstone. That's not a ton of people, okay, that are here. And he divides them out into, 3 groups of 100. I keep on losing my spot here. And he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside, ? And he said in verse 17, boom! It's all coming together. Yeah, instead of bringing my little cup, I'm bringing an empty jar, definitely big enough to put a torch underneath. And we're like, so Gideon, hey, we need to make this happen. Gideon's like, oh yeah, okay, let's go fight this battle because we're going to win. And then he divides so instead of amassing them all at once, he divides them into 3. And then he equips them with trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them. Where's the swords, Gideon? I guess if he knows he's going to win, then we don't need swords. That's, we're going to have these other things. But yeah, we'll torch them to death, or we'll smash pots on their face or something like that. But Gideon's got a plan, because he says this in verse 17, watch me, he told them. I want you to follow my lead, which those 2 sentences, that sounds a little bit more like the leader that I would expect God to pick, and not, this kid that's afraid threshing wheat in a wine press. He says, watch me and follow my lead. Something's happened to this kid, and I think that it's finally he's realizing that he's living up to the potential that God has thrown on him. He says, when I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly what I do. Verse 18, and I and all who are with me, whenever I and all who are with me blow our trumpets from all around the camp, blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. And Gideon and the 300 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle of the watch, just after they had changed the guard. And they blew their trumpets, and they broke their jars that were in their hands that they used to get water with. That's in verse 20. The 3 companies blew the trumpets, smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets that they were to blow. And they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon, which is hilarious because where are the swords? They're not there. They're replaced with a jar and some torches, a sword for the Lord and a sword for Gideon. And while each man held his position around the camp, the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. And we're going to read about that in a second. Okay, so what's the strategy here that Gideon has come up with? Cause chaos. All right, let's see. Yes, middle of the night, strategic. Okay, just let's see where Gideon's at. Middle of the night, strategic because they are on this mesa above them, so they have the advantage, and the Midianites are down below. Okay, and then what does he do with his army? Surrounds the whole camp. So he divides these 300 guys amongst. If they were really as numerous as the sands of this, how far apart are these guys? But they surrounded the camp, and apparently they are avoiding detection, so they're kind of invisible at the same time. And then what's the battle strategy? Yeah. Whenever Gideon goes and blows his trumpet, they're gonna smash their pots. So here's here's a pretty intense sound coming from seemingly all over the Midianites, and blow their trumpets, which makes their army seem how big? Enormous. If your army is in this circle, but you're hearing trumpets from this circle that's a lot bigger, that's a pretty big army that I'm assuming is around me, which is enough to cause chaos. It says right here, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. So they're caught by surprise. This is all some real big military strategy stuff, okay? Now, did Gideon get all of this military strategy from God? Like, did God tell him exactly what to do? Yeah. Ooh.
My guess is he just let Gideon do what he wants and then step the swords.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's finish this battle then, and we can kind of come back to that. Verse 22, when the 300 trumpets had sounded, which 300 trumpets is quite a lot. If you've been to a band concerts where, or even at, football games, and there's just, 10 or even less than that. I mean, they're still pretty loud. 300 trumpets sounded. The Lord, very important, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. So Israel doesn't need swords because they have the Midianite swords, and it's causing confusion. And the two guys that were in the tent, he's like, yeah, the loaf of barley is going to come and destroy the camp. Yeah. And then whenever this happens, the guy's like, grabs a sword and stabs the other guy. Like, whoa, what is happening? The Lord is causing confusion, which, like, the Israelites, yeah, they have a part to play in all of this, but who is the one getting the victory, and who is the one that's actually achieving the victory? Man, it's God. The Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords, and the army fled to Beth Shittah and Zerah as far as the border of Abel Mahaloah near Tabath. All right, lots of places and stuff too. But let's go back to that question, okay? Did God give Gideon a battle plan for this is exactly how this is going to go? It doesn't matter either way. So this is where I think this is impactful for us. Do you think that Gideon had those capabilities and leadership qualities since the beginning? Ooh. If he did, he didn't know it. I don't know what the time frame is in between whenever he got his call and this moment. But he didn't know it for sure. But he had the potential, obviously, to become this kind of a guy. And so here is God, which, by the way, Marshall was like, oh man, I didn't want to interrupt you as you were going, but I had some thoughts last Tuesday. I was like, bro, like, go just give me, tell us. Gideon's name means to tear down, which is really fitting because why? What did he do last week? He tore down the altars, right? So this whole time, he was born with the name Gideon, which means to tear down. And then finally, he lives into the purpose for his life, which is to tear down. And then he receives a new name, which is what? It's Jerub-Baal, which means what? Yeah, he's the enemy of Baal. He's contending with Baal. And so now he's living in that too. And so here's this guy that I think has had the potential to be this leader this whole time. And finally, after he or God has dealt with his fear and with his doubts and with his scaredness and with his timidness, after God has kind of dealt with all that stuff, finally he's able to live a life of faith. So this story isn't about his leadership, and the story isn't about how great Israel was. This story is all about, look what happens whenever you have some faith. Look what happens whenever you actually decide, like, God gets to decide who I am, not me or my circumstances or my world or other people in my life. Like, God is the one that decides who I am and what I do with my life. And if I have enough faith to trust that he really has called me out to be these things, then I can go out and act in that, and God is faithful to those things. Just something that I think is intense there. And I'm here for that, man. So all of that stuff was hidden underneath fear and anger and all of that. And all of that was just inside of him. And in the end, it was God that tipped the scales. So these guys, they started fleeing at the end of verse 22. The army fled from this place to that place, as far as this place to that place. Nice. So what they're doing is they are right here, and they're fleeing towards the Jordan because they're from this area right here, the east and the south of the Dead Sea, okay? They're from this area, and so they're fleeing, trying to go back home to mommy, and trying to get out of here. Verse 23, now the Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. So the whole army comes back, and they pursue the Midianites. And Gideon sent out messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth-barah." So these guys are trying to get past the Jordan River, which I can't remember. It's not a huge river. It's not like the Mississippi or something like that. But I mean, in the stories that we've read in Joshua, it was big enough that it had to be parted for the people to go all the way past. So one could get hung up to the water and trying to go back home to mommy and stuff like that. And so Gideon, because of the wise leader that he's become, he sent messengers throughout the country of where? Ephraim. And he says, "Come against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as to this place." So is the tribe of Ephraim, were they called in the original army of 32,000? Evidently not. It says that the Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were all called out. And so apparently we don't know if Gideon forgot to invite the Ephraimites, or if he intentionally was like, yeah, I want these guys, but not these guys. I don't like these guys. Or if it was just, something in between or something like that. But he calls down to them and says, hey, listen, they're trying to run away. We need to destroy them. And so that's what happens. All the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters of the Jordan as far as that, like they captured it and made sure these guys couldn't go out. And they also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of these 2 generals, Oreb and Zeb, to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. Okay, a couple of things I want to capitalize on right here that we're going to find in chapter 8 that they didn't kill all of them. They didn't kill all of them, which is what God commanded them to do. God commanded Gideon to do. He said, I want you to go and take out the entirety of the camp of the Midianites and the Amorites and the eastern peoples. Like, go and take them all out. And they kind of failed in that, but they did capture 2 important people. Who are they? Oreb and Zeb. Don't really know anything about them, but we know that they're Midianite leaders. So think about how big this army was, and then you cut off the 2 serpent heads, and the rest of the snake, the rest of the dragon is obliterated and cast out because they got that. Something important here. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeb where? At the winepress of Zeb, ? And they pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of these guys who was by the Jordan, which, this is just me. I think it's like super bad, like super cool. Whenever it's like, yeah, we're going to take these guys out, and then we're going to behead the leaders and bring those back. I know it's a little gross. Amy's grimacing a little bit. It's a little gross, but I think it's like super cool. And this might just be the boy, not the man. I guess a little bit, but the boy in me of like, oh, like that's like so, like, I beat you, and guess what? Like, this is what your leaders look like now. Like, this is what the Lord has done to the Midianites. Whenever David kills Goliath, it's so funny. If you'll ask Raina about the story, she'll tell you the real story. Because in our children's books and all of that, the whole story ends with Goliath taking a pebble to the head, and he falls down, and he's dead. And then David has a small speech, and then they go and take care of the Philistines, all of that. There's an important detail there that I've told my daughter, and she has not forgotten, that David goes up, and he takes Goliath's own sword, which is huge, cuts off the dude's head. That's bad. That's cool. But I know it's like, oh, that's just gross. Why are we just kill them, man? We don't have to cut their heads off and stuff. I think it's important though, because it's like, it's not just that we've won the battle, but that we have spiritually won the battle too. Like, these guys can't come back from this. Like, they're not going to be a thorn in our flesh anymore. And I can hold up the dead head of my enemy in front of Gideon and say, look what we've done. You guys are like, bro, we need to stop talking about this. Only thing, I guess these are the last two things I want to talk about. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb. Where? At the winepress of Zeb. Where did Gideon's journey start as a leader? At the winepress. At the winepress, the angel of the Lord said, you are going to decimate the Midianites and the Amorites and all of those eastern peoples, and they are not going to be a thorn in your flesh any longer. And what do you know? At a winepress, near a winepress, Gideon has brought the heads of these two generals as a fulfillment of this is what God said he was going to do. And in fact, God did it. Let's go. I'm here for that, man. I feel encouraged by all that. The very last verses right here that we're going to read, I just want to read them just so that we can tie a bow around the story. So chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, that's where we're going to end today. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, hey, why did you treat us like this? Why didn't you call us whenever you were going to go and fight Midian? And they challenged him vigorously. Okay. We already noted that, was he just like, I want these guys for sure. Oh yeah, these guys over here, these guys. But don't let any of the Ephraimites know, because they're kind of lame and we don't want them as a part of our army. We don't really know why. Maybe he just forgot. Maybe it was an intentional snub. Remember, these tribes are all descendants of 12 brothers, right? Joseph, all of that stuff. These are 12 brothers. And so I know many of us have kids, if not all of us have kids in here. If you have brothers, or just do siblings fight? Most of the time. Morgan has to ask me sometimes because he's an only child. She's like, is this normal? Like, actually, yeah. I hated my sister vehemently until I realized that she was a normal human and had value, later on into my college years, whenever you realize. But you don't really get there. But this is some brotherly squabbles of maybe Manasseh and Ephraim, maybe they've had some bad blood in the past, so we're not going to invite them. And so the people, the Ephraimites are like, why didn't you call us into battle because they might have wanted a little bit of the glory or a part of the action and stuff too. And Gideon's like, man, it doesn't really matter. Verse 2, he says, now, what have I accomplished compared to you guys? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? Basically, that's translated as hey man, listen, I was the one that got them all, frenzied and chaos, and God was turning all of that. But who got to kill the kings? Well, that was you guys. You guys got to kill the two kings, and you guys brought them to me. God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. And what was I able to do compared to you guys? And basically, he just kind of smoothed things over. And at this their resentment against him subsided. So he kind of calmed it. And so you can tie a little bow on this story too. In this we've got one more chapter of Gideon, and unfortunately, these were some of his best moments. So you've got a whole other chapter of some not great moments, and in fact, this was a wonderful moment. This was the peak, because from here, things kind of start going downhill for Gideon. And the last couple of verses that Marshall's going to walk us through next week are oh, come on, man. How did we fall this far? So some things I want us to capitalize on is that it doesn't matter what the world says about you or what even you think about you. If God's calling you out to go out in faithfulness, take a step out in faithfulness. You won't begin to imagine the things that God has in store for you. And God has called us each to be brave, powerful warriors. Whether we think that we're brave or powerful doesn't matter, in the fact that he's called us all to do that in our communities. So any last thoughts or comments or questions or anything as we wrap up our study today?
I think verse 18, there's a weird part. Because he says, blow your trumpets and shout for the Lord and for Gideon.
Yeah.
So it's a little strange.
Yeah.
Be rallying us and be like, let's do it for God and for
But also this guy.
that's strange.
Yeah, I wonder too if, just capitalizing on that, like whenever Gideon got that encouragement, he came back and he said, "The Lord is not me, but